Hey year three, Mr. Martin here. I hope you've all had a brilliant weekend and are ready for another week of learning with us on our YouTube channel. So as it's Monday, we're going to start with our history lesson around ancient Greece. So let me share my screen with you and we will get started for today. Share screen. Here we go then. So hopefully, as you can see on my screen, we're going to have a little bit of feedback from last week and a bit of a rewind. So in last week's history lesson, I asked you to do some research around the gods and goddesses of ancient Greece. Now, in that lesson, we found out that gods were male and goddesses were female. And I asked you to create something called a tree map to show all the different gods and goddesses and some bullet points underneath about what area of life each god or goddess was responsible. So I've just got two examples on here of some great work from last week. So first of all, big shout out and a big whoop honk to Ella from my class. Well done, Ella. We loved seeing your tree map, and I know how much work you put into this because I saw half of it, and then you wanted to continue and make it even better to produce this fantastic piece of work, beautifully presented, extra information underneath about each god and goddess. So well done, Ella. Mrs. Weston will have put some dojos on for you. Fantastic. Well done. And also to Isaac Taylor Perks. Well done, Isaac. I loved yours as well. And again, similarly to Ella, you've got all this extra information underneath about each god or goddess. Beautifully presented. Excellent research. Well done, you. So, Wupong for Isaac as well. Right, we're now going to move on to today's lesson. And it follows on quite nicely from our gods and goddesses because, as you can see on our what, how, and why, we are going to understand the importance of temples in ancient Greece. We're going to have a look at some of them. Exploration of the world, because we're going to be zooming in on ancient Greece. And why are we doing that? So that you guys are going to design and build your own versions of a Greek temple at home now. It's quite a nice lesson, so I'll come to that at the end. But first of all, we need to learn about them and take on board all the knowledge about what a Greek temple is and why they were important. So, first things first, in your book, can you write today's date, Monday the 25th of January 2021, and can you write history next to it, please, because that is the topic for our wonder lesson today. So pause the video while you do that now, and then we will get started. Fantastic. So hopefully you have had time to do that now. So I'm going to take you through two aspects of the temple. First of all, we're going to look at why temples were important in ancient Greece and what they were for. And then we're going to have a look at something called the structure. Okay, so why did the Greeks build temples? Now, there were a couple of reasons why the Greeks built temples, and we're going to have a look at what they look like in a minute. So the Greeks built these big buildings to celebrate success of their city-state. So we know what city-states are now: Sparta, Athens, Mount Olympus, Olympia, Crete. If that city-state won a war or they discovered something or they invented something new, then to celebrate it, they might build a temple as a sort of monument, as a memorial to celebrate this. That is one reason. And I know that you guys have been finding out with Miss McCabe in your English that they also built some temples to show thanks to a patron god or goddess. So Zeus has got a temple, Athena has got a temple, Hera has got a temple, okay? And that's to show thanks for that particular god or goddess. You put that on your research from your tree maps last week, so well done. And the Greeks were actually fantastic architects, which means they were brilliant at designing and thinking of all the different aspects of a building and then actually being able to build it and put it into place and make sure that it's stable and that some of them are still there today, all these thousands of years later. They were great designers and then great architects in being able to build these grand and magnificent buildings. Now we're going to have a look at some in a minute. And as you can see at the bottom, they did it sometimes to show off, show, look how good we are. We're the greatest architects. We can build such large, grand buildings, and they're competing with, if not better, than all the buildings in the world at the time. Okay, right. So now we're going to have a look at some Greek temples. I've got 4 on my screen here. And what I want you to do now is pause the video. And you will see that I've got my Evaluate It Masters glasses. Now we know that evaluate it means to look at them and think the same, what are the similarities, and what is the difference. We know why they had temples. Now we're looking at the structure, how they were made. I want you to look at the features of all these temples, what's the same and what's different. So pause the video now and talk about that with the people at home, and then we will go through it together. Okay, a little bit longer. Hopefully you have had a good look at all 4 pictures and you've managed to look at the similarities and differences. What's the same, what's different about these images? So hopefully you might have noticed that they are all built similarly, okay? They all have these tall pillars to hold them up, okay? And they are called columns. We're going to look at those in a minute. They've all got those on them. They're all raised off the ground a little bit, aren't they? So that's another similarity. They've all got these steps lead up to them. There's some similarities. They've all got a sort of another platform bit that goes around the top, and we're going to learn what that's called shortly. Differences. I wonder if you can tell me what might be different about them. Look at maybe the texture and the materials that are being used. Okay, so if we look at them, it looks like they might have all been built out of similar things, but they're not all the same color, are they? This one's much lighter color than this one down here. So the Greeks actually used many different materials to build the temple. Some were built out of marble, some were built out of stone, some were built out of rocks. Okay, so it depends which city-state they're in and which materials they had and things like that. So they were built out of different materials. That's a difference. Another one is nowadays how intact they are. If you look at this one down here, it looks to be a bit more ruined, have more ruins. It's not quite as intact as, say, this one. Okay, so these two probably look like they still have their structure and their framework to them more than these two, which are a bit more run down and ruined. So maybe suggests that they're slightly older. Good. So I hope you've had some good discussion with people at home. Now we're going to look at what we call the different parts of a. So structure. We know now that that means how it was made. What are the different parts that make it up? And as we know, there are a lot of similarities between how these Greek temples were made. So as I said, we have these columns that are tall cylinder shape. So if you know your 3D shapes like a cylinder, hold up the temple. And the design on these was different depending on the temple. There were 3 main designs. You had something called Doric columns. So they're the most simple ones, and they just had these lines going down them. They're quite simple. You had the Ionic columns, and they had a bit more detail at the top. They had like these scroll shapes. Then the most detailed columns, so the grandest ones, would be the Corinthian columns, sorry, and they had much, much more detail. They've got like these leafy shapes and lots more curves on them. So 3 different types of columns, and what they all had columns to support the temple to hold them up. As we talked about, we had steps. That was often to make sure that you could build them on a level playing field, because often the temples were built on top of hills. So they built the steps so that it was all the same level, and then you can build your temple from there. So it had steps leading up to them. On top of your columns, we had this extra platform layer, which we call a frieze or a frieze. Okay? This is often where a lot of the detail was carved into the marble or the stone. This one's a bit blurry on it. I don't know if you can see it. This is where the detail would go. And then inside the temple, it would often have maybe a statue of the deity or the god or goddess that the temple was for, or some sort of statue that the temple was built for. So, how did the ancient Greeks build these temples? Remember, this was nearly 3,000 years ago. So they didn't have lorries, they didn't have diggers, they didn't have cranes that we would have now. Okay, so it's actually quite impressive, I think, that they would manage to build such magnificent buildings all that time ago with very, very little resources. Okay, so they built them using lots of ropes and pulley systems. So there would be people pulling and lifting it up, and take lots of manpower, and they'd have to make sure that they'd measured it all out and it was all in the right place. And then that's how they managed to build it. So they didn't have cement, they didn't have diggers, they didn't have lorries, didn't have cranes. It was all through manpower and teamwork that they built these grand temples all over. So there we have a run through of why temples are important to ancient Greece and how they were built and the structure. Your task now is I want you to put your creative hats on, and you are going to build your own Greek temple. Now, I'm pretty much leaving this reign up to you, but I am going to give you a few ideas. So if you have any Play-Doh at home, in year 3 last year, we built some Greek temples out of Play-Doh. So we can make the columns and the frieze that sits on top. If you've got any cardboard, you can make it out of that. You don't have to go into that much detail if you want. You could use, if you've got some books, you could stand them up on their end and start to build on it like that. If you've got Lego at home, you can build it out of Lego. If you've got any arts and crafts stuff, you can build it out of that. I'm pretty much leaving it up to you how you build your Greek temple, okay? Be as creative as you can. It needs to have these columns. Cardboard might be quite good for that one if you've got that. You need to maybe build some steps out of some paper, place the frieze on. If you want to add detail to here, perhaps you could draw on your cardboard if you're using that. Play-Doh is always good. Lego's a brilliant one. Be as creative as you can. Make sure you send over your buildings of your temples, and we will have a look at them next week. I'll share some brilliant ones of some great examples at the start of our next lesson. Have a brilliant day, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you.